As we all know, luck is a very real thing in football. The whole sport is played with a ball that will take weird hops. That's kind of an aspect of the game. Refs might make bad calls. On top of this, you could have certain scenarios where, one team, there's a miscommunication which results in someone running a wrong route and it results in an interception. The other team makes that same mistake, but just given the result of the play, it just falls incomplete. So luck's a big part of the game. We all know that. What I wanted to do was talk about, well, who benefited from luckiness last year and who didn't. Who maybe, actually is better than we realize because of certain fluky plays. Well, it's easier to come up with that idea than it is to actually come up with the results, but I think I got something that will get us somewhat there. So the two things I wanted to really pay attention to is first, turnover luck. Turnover luck is a very real thing, and that's why this year I kind of have stopped using interceptions as a whole, and I just use turnover-worthy plays. Like, for one thing, it's kind of weird how we use interceptions, but we don't use fumbles. Like, fumbles lost, that's just as bad as an interception. That has just the same effect, and also, half of these turnovers and half of these interceptions aren't really the quarterback's fault, but also they'll have plenty of plays where that should have been interception, but just don't get called. And so when we're dealing with small sample sizes, that can really skew some data. So I like turnover-worthy plays a lot more. So that's one of the things I wanted to look at. And also behind the line of scrimmage passes. You look at that, and it really fluctuates year in and year out. When you throw behind the line of scrimmage, the quarterback doesn't have to do too much, which logically makes some sense, right? It is more of a team stat than it is a quarterback stat. So I decided, let's just kind of use those two things and create a passer rating with taking those out. So instead of using interceptions, we're going to use turnover-worthy plays, but count them as though they're interceptions. And also, roughly 1.5 turnover-worthy plays is 1 interception. So I used that calculation as well and rounded to create, as close as we could to that. And I also just took away all of the behind the line of scrimmage passes. So those two things completely taken out of account. Now I want to just go back and say, okay, if we're taking those out, what would your passer rating actually be? And for every quarterback, it's going to be lower except for a couple, simply because most quarterbacks, you get a benefit from throwing behind the line of scrimmage. Your completion percentage goes up and things like that. However, it's still a very interesting thing. So let's just get into the chart. So right off the bat, 1 through 8, this is going to be what we're measuring here is the difference. So basically, number 1, Joe Burrow, he actually was the most unlucky using this formula, which again, not a perfect formula by any means. I wanted to create a passer rating though, just because I figured that would, it's a stat we all know, it's a stat we're all aware of. But according to Joe Burrow, his passer rating, if we evaluate it the way I did, would be about 3.8 points higher than it actually was, which is saying something because his passer rating was already very impressive, 108. Only Aaron Rodgers had a higher passer rating, but if you actually look at this and you evaluate this stuff, Burrow's passer rating would have been higher, which is interesting. And again, I want to be very clear here in that the average quarterback actually loses about 4 points using this formula. So it's almost like an 8-point swing from Burrow's perspective, which is interesting. Also, Justin Herbert, the guy who gets compared a lot to Burrow, he was also relatively unlucky with this stuff, whether it's behind the line of scrimmage passes not working out too well or just turnover luck, and even Brady you throw in there with the turnover luck stuff. A lot of these guys did a better job of protecting the football than you might have realized just looking at interceptions. You have Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray as well. Andy Dalton, a couple Bears guys, Dalton and Fields right there, which kind of makes some sense because if you're getting the same amount of luck typically from these behind the line of scrimmage passes, as I'm saying, it's not a totally luck stat necessarily, but kind of stuff outside of your control, sort of your teammates doing stuff, which happens on all plays, of course, but more specifically in those behind the line of scrimmage plays. And even Matthew Stafford, who I think some people kind of have the reputation, have the feeling of like, oh, well, he got away with some stuff that typically he doesn't get away with this year. Well, according to this, he's actually on the lucky side, or on the unlucky side, which is good because obviously for the future, you expect him to continue to play better. The next chart here, so the next 8 on this list, you got guys like Russell Wilson, Ryan Tannehill, Mac Jones, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones, Matt Ryan, Kirk Cousins, and Zach Wilson, all very similar on this chart, not too far off, but these are the guys who, okay, no massive difference here, but, luck did kind of go against them a little bit, so worth noting. And on the flip side, it's, the same thing, but just the other side of the coin of guys who maybe got slight benefits this year. So guys like Dak, Tua, Aaron Rodgers, Trevor Lawrence, Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and Jameis Winston all had, varying degrees of success that was a little bit out of their control, which again, that checks out for me. Like the Jameis Winston, being a little bit lucky this year, okay, that makes some sense. But again, with all these guys, it's not like any of them, the reason why they were successful is because they were lucky or anything like that. Just maybe some slight things that went in their direction. Going over here now, this is where things get really interesting. These are the guys, there's a couple towards the bottom that we'll get to in a second that are huge jumps here. But, again, guys who have somewhat significant jumps, which, is maybe concerning, like a Carson Wentz, who maybe you feel like, he was inconsistent, but if he can put it together, well, actually, he was kind of worse than the average person suggests. Same thing with like a Teddy Bridgewater, which makes some sense. I did feel like his numbers were a bit more inflated than actually deserved. Same thing with like a Davis Mills, who had some things go really I think for him in terms of the luck department, although again, you could easily make the other argument, well, look at what he was going up against. Look at what the talent was around him, which is totally very fair as well. Number 28, you have Patrick Mahomes. So this is where, Mahomes detractors are going to be very happy to see him on this list. And it's actually a typo. He should have been number 30, not number 28. I screwed up the typo thing there. But Mahomes is just one of those guys where it seems like he always would be on this list with a very high number. It seems like that's just kind of how he is for whatever reason. It's been pretty consistent with him, whereas most of these guys, it's just one year is one way, the other year it's a completely different way. I have a couple of theories on that. One is just that he throws the ball in such a unique way that defenders are just worse at catching it. I think that's a legitimate reason why the turnover-worthy plays is always much higher than his interceptions. And I also think you could make the argument of being in the same Andy Reid system that does, have a lot of good behind the line of scrimmage throws that can elevate Mahomes' stats without actually him having to do too much. So that's interesting. Jared Goff, another guy who maybe some people thought was getting too much criticism, but the way, and again, maybe part of this is just the way the Lions had to run their offense. There was some of those behind the line of scrimmage plays, but still, interesting there. Taylor Heineke as well. So if you're on defense about Heineke, maybe this can help push you over defense and say, okay, maybe we don't give him the other year. And then the final three, Big Ben. Okay, who cares? He's retired anyways, whatever. Jalen Hurts, though, and Jimmy G. Really, Jimmy G, I think we all knew like there was going to be a big drop-off. Obviously, playing in that Shanahan scheme helps him a lot. That's not a big surprise. The Jalen Hurts stuff is, though, and it kind of makes you wonder, okay, maybe he is a bit of a product of, the system that he's in. I don't know. I can't say for sure, but that's certainly very interesting. And that's something that would give me a little bit of pause if I'm an Eagles fan, is the fact that these kind of numbers that tend to fluctuate year in and year out kind of, he did very well in, which oftentimes means that the next year he's going to do mediocre in. One more luck-based stat I wanted to talk about. These are guys, Pro Football Focus grade when a play takes more than 2.5 seconds. That might seem like kind of a weird thing to talk about, a PFF grade when a play takes more than 2.5 seconds, but this is actually a great way of really evaluating who is good. Like guys who are good at this stuff tend to consistently be good. It's a really great way of viewing this. And you have guys like Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Tom Brady, Matt Stafford, and Justin Herbert who are great at this stuff. And it's kind of interesting as well, where you think about 2.5 seconds, you typically think, guys who scramble around, like a Josh Allen, that makes some sense. But someone like Tom Brady, and to a lesser extent Matt Stafford, also are guys who, they're not necessarily known for their scrambling ability, but they're still able to make good stuff happen when a play goes for a long time, as opposed to making bad stuff happen like the guys at the bottom of the list. And the one thing I should say is that the one way where this might not translate year in and year out is young players. Young players, young quarterbacks, there's a big difference. And that's why you see several young quarterbacks on this list, Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson most notably. But guys like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold, that might be a bit discouraging. Mayfield, maybe you can just make the argument, it was his shoulder. Still gives me a little bit of pause. Sam Darnold gives me a lot of pause. Ben Roethlisberger, again, he's on the bad side of a lot of these lists, but he's retired, so who cares? So yeah, I think it's interesting stuff, quite frankly. I do. I think all this stuff is pretty fascinating. Again, I think Eagles fans will not be happy about this, but again, all I'm doing is I created the algorithm and then just punched the numbers in, and that's what came out. So that's all I did here, and I think it makes some sense to some degree. I don't think any of this, the only ones that really were massive, I thought Burrow's was pretty significant on the positive side, and even Justin Herbert's I thought was pretty significant. And then on the other side, the only ones I thought were really significant that matter were Jalen Hurts and Jimmy Garoppolo. Garoppolo's make sense, and so am I going to make a huge exception for Jalen Hurts? Like, I don't know, probably not. I think there's a reason to be a little bit scared of that, although the flip side I should mention is part of what you can maybe make an argument for is that, like, well, he helped set up the screen pass by his ability to run, and that's a threat, although that doesn't really translate with, like, Kyler and Lamar, who you could also make that argument for. So, I don't know. Interesting stuff. But, yeah, that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. What are your thoughts on all of this? Always love hearing from you. And, of course, as always, thanks for watching.